So welcome everyone to the weekly status update call of the Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling Core Unit. Today is December the 10th, and one of our own team members will be presenting today about the art of core unit budgeting. So there have been a lot of discussions on the forum and on Discord about how we can improve the core unit budgeting mechanisms and give more insight into what the money is being spent on and how much it's actually being spent and how much is going back. So all that Retro will be talking about. Take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Wouter. Like you mentioned, I'm Retro, a contributor at the Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling Core Unit. And one of the initiatives our group has taken on this quarter has been improving DAO budgets through transparency and quality controls. The discussion today will first start off by discussing some of the principles from decentralization that we will apply to this process, but focus through the lens of the SES mandate, which is improving access to workforce, capital, and work. From there, we'll drill into capital, focusing again on increasing transparency and quality controls, and then touch briefly on the value that this provides, as well as the future improvements that the DAO should have in scope, even during these early stages of the process. So what is the process? This is from a post that Wouter made back in April of this year that was associated to the mid-40s, talking about how core units need to lead by example. With no centralized authority, similar to centralized organizations, there is a much larger groupthink that needs to occur in order to define best practices. By leading from example, we're able to create an environment where the work of others is analyzed in a consistent method and consensus is able to be built. Once we have a consensus throughout the community, we're able to standardize that a little more informally than a MIP. And once that's been in place and the value of those processes are evident, it becomes formalized canon in the form of a MIP. By zooming out and focusing on SES's mandate, we're able to see some of this process in play and the value that it creates. Starting with workforce, Project X-Ray, I would say, is in between steps 2 and 3 of the decentralized principle framework at this moment, because they have conducted expert interviews, which has led them to build a ecosystem survey to form consensus among the much larger ecosystem. From there, we'll start to see recommendations be made to standardize and formalize this process to attract some of the best talent to MakerDAO. Jumping to the bottom of work, the incubator and the grants program is a little bit further ahead with a very standardized process for incubating potential core units, as well as providing funds to other initiatives outside the current scope of core units and SES. We have 4 graduated core units that are currently operating independently, with 2 incubes currently in the RFC process. 5 incubes are in the earlier stages, with a couple announced and a couple more announcements coming in early 2020 or 2022. As well as a growing list of grantees that we're excited to share again in early 2022. But refocusing on capital and thinking about the concepts of transparency and quality, we have to accept that these concepts go hand in hand. So when applying the decentralized principle framework against this, how can we drive these themes by analyzing the work of others and, again, summarizing and formalizing the processes that have been working thus far? I want to take a quick shout out for MakerBird here, because I believe that this represents the work that we're doing the most succinctly right now. And we'll talk about some of the limitations of the platform in just a minute. But this platform is able to take the mid-40s that are currently in place, distill the budget implementations that those MIPs enable, whether it's a manual transfer or a vesting stream, and then at least present the transactions from the protocol to the core unit wallets today in a summarized fashion. But wouldn't it be interesting to have this on a very detailed level where we can drill into the expense items, either by budget category or even down to the expense themselves per the core unit in real time? The tools that we have to enable this today, as previously mentioned, is the MIP 40, these touch on the DAI budget categories that are in place for core units, as well as the MKR incentives. But what other tools do we have in order to progress the vision of a transparent and high quality budgeting framework at the DAO? SES has been investing effort into improving the wallet configurations in addition to the tools used to manage the budgets. That would be the core unit budget spreadsheet that we'll show in a little bit. From there, the data flows into a monthly budget statement that SES currently has in place, but in order to make that more valuable, we've determined that auditing needs to be a little bit more robust and a little bit more standardized throughout the DAO, also to make the process more repeatable and not increase the overhead for either any core unit or governance as a whole. Again, the ultimate goal from creating, defining, and formalizing all of these aspects of the budget is to create a DAO-wide reporting tool to further increase the transparency. I would say, again, going back to the decentralization framework, that we're squarely, all of these concepts have been in place and have progressed through stages 1 and 2, because core units have led by example. And we've had the opportunity to analyze some of the value that the diverse frameworks have created, as well as some of the shortcomings, and isolate what the DAO wants to see in terms of reporting and fact checking on the budget. So everyone's familiar with MIP 40s. Going into the wallet setup, SES has had in place today the payment flow that's represented in the diagram on the screen, where funds flow from the Maker protocol into an auditor wallet. The initial steps that we had put in place allow core units to operate with some sense of business continuity. There's themes of job security that other core units have tried to address in various different ways. And the methodology that SES has put in place is more of an intermediary step, where the funds flow into an auditor wallet. They're controlled both by the DAO and the protocol itself through 3 out of 4 multi-sig, and a consensus is needed across the signers to distribute funds into the operational wallets. The operational wallets are shown in blue. And again, SES is unique in the sense that there are 3 operating wallets for our core unit, whereas most core units have 1 budget category. SES has 3, being the permanent team, the team that operates the core unit, the incubator program, funds dedicated for teams within that program, and then the grants program, again, for projects that are specific in that swim lane. The evolution that we're looking to put in place and improve upon the information that we've gathered from using this setup is to make the audit multi-sig wallet more robust. With that, we've introduced a nested multi-sig architecture. This multi-sig architecture defines roles for signers within the wallet and allows multiple role wallets to have more signers involved, but still require the auditor wallet to have 2 out of 2 signers. So to explain that more succinctly, the 2 roles within the auditor wallet would be the accountant role and the auditor role. Today, we have 2 individuals serving in each role for a total of 4 signers, and each 1 out of 2 of those roles will have to sign the wallets to complete the auditor multi-sig's 2 out of 2 signature to process any transactions. The accountant role signers are at a higher level, doing more of the actual analytical work and auditing work, whereas the auditor role has more of the responsibility for validating the information that the accountant role develops, and ultimately engages with the core unit facilitators as well as the community if escalation is required. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The last thing to note here is that the Maker protocol itself is not a signer on this wallet, but it is a beneficiary, which captures the requirements for MIP 47 that is defining multi-sig wallets that the protocol will recognize. the protocol is able to withdraw up to $1 billion of funds from the auditor wallet at any point in time, not requiring signatures. So again, that enables the MIT 47 requirements, but it also has implications when it comes to taxes, depending on the jurisdictions that the core units operate within. That should, again, meet some of these compliance requirements, as well as increase the quality control elements of the budget flow. Going back to the same graphic again, but highlighting different information, the payment flow that's created between these three units leverages several smart contracts as well as manual processes. The first distribution from the Maker protocol to the auditor wallet will involve a DSS vest stream. The reason for this is going back to the job continuity concept, is that funds will flow automatically from the protocol to the auditor wallet based on the monthly budget cap. The monthly budget cap is the hard limit that governance votes on for a quarterly basis. So taking the monthly budget cap and multiplying it by 3, you'll get the maximum amount that the auditor wallet is allowed to hold. The payment flow is designed in such a way where the auditor wallet to start a month will only have 2x this monthly budget cap. From there, DSS Vest will increase the funds on hand for the auditor wallet to the 3x or the quarterly limit for the budget cap, and that last month's accrual of funds will then be distributed to the operational wallets, topping them up to their budget cap amounts. The budget cap amounts for the operational wallets are a little bit more flexible and don't necessarily have a hard limit of above the budget cap, but that as a program matures and progresses, there's operational efficiencies that should be achieved, and that forecast may decrease if the funds aren't redirected towards new initiatives. So in order to make sure that funds are being used appropriately and not just being spent because they're on hand, a 3-month forecast will be produced, and the soft budget cap limit for the operational wallets will then be that 3-month forecast, and any funds that are not used within a given month are returned through the DSS below smart contract, which gives funds directly back to the protocol. Going back to the decentralization principles for just a minute, what the MIPS have enabled the DAO to do is to increase transparency through a higher level than is usable right now at the DAO. What SES was able to put together was a visual representation with links to the original sources of information for various core units. And as you can see highlighted here, there are other core units using this auditor wallet setup today. I believe it's about 5 that have graduated from SES, including SES, that leverages this framework. But you can see, real tiny, there's many more core units that are not using this setup today. And what that creates is a flow of funds from the protocol to operational wallets that aren't fully traceable and don't require fact checking, if you will, on how the funds are used, more so than just the MIP expiring and being reapplied. To support a more formal process, we have to put tools in place. And 2 of those tools that SES has been leveraging since its inception has been the budget spreadsheet and monthly budget statements. On the left, you can see a quick screenshot. We'll get into that in a minute. And then on the right, you can see scrolling through the detailed budget statement for SES in the 3 individual core units, operational buckets broken up. The core unit budget spreadsheet is an all-up view for the facilitator to manage finances at the core unit. Today, there's no set process, and we have garnered interest from other core units that have been in existence at the DAO for quite some time that are looking for extra support in the category of managing budgets. What this does is it focuses the attention of the facilitator on the monthly budget cap by building forecasts in advance, again, going back to that 3-month concept, that are related to their operations. That positions them to be forward-looking in terms of controlling budgets and not run into a situation where they're suddenly surprised by an increase and are unable to operate due to those increased expenses. The 3 categories that I have highlighted on this screen starts with forecast and moves into estimates. Estimate is more of a real-time guess on what those expenses will be, and an actual is obviously the actual cost for that expenses for the month. The way that those 3 budget categories work is that the forecast is set 3 months out. The estimate is set more during the current month that the expenses are for. A good example of this is gas fees, which is the second line highlighted here. The gas fees right now are estimated at 0 because they are so volatile, but as it gets closer to the transaction, the core unit facilitator can put in that estimate and the actuals would then be updated once the transfer occurs. Those 3 categories distill into the monthly budget report. SES has a GitHub repository that has the reports for every month of operation that summarizes the information from the core unit budgeting spreadsheet into the following categories: the actuals, the forecasts, MKR vesting, and transfers. Now, we haven't talked much about MKR in the purpose of this presentation because it's outside the scope of the tools that are currently created, but there is more coming down the line for in terms of tools for managing that. But the important thing to highlight here is that this provides the DAO a complete view and a similar view to what the facilitator sees in terms of expenses, how the funds are flowing out, through which channels, and more importantly, how they relate to the budget categories that the DAO has approved. So today, as say an independent audit of any core unit, you really only have the ERC20 wallet address and on-chain transactions to try to decipher, and that really doesn't allow you to hone into those groups today. What this process and framework puts into place is a standardized way for the DAO to understand it, but then also for data to be extracted, which we'll touch on in a little bit when we get to automation. The standard presentation of information allows the auditing process to have sharper teeth, if you will. Once the budget is delivered, the first step of the auditing process is to make sure that formatting and completeness is achieved. If the statement isn't formatted up to the consistent process, or if it's not complete, then that'll initially be rejected to have the core unit resubmit. From there, the auditing team with the accountant first doing the initial pass checks for consistency within the MIP, making sure that transactions are within allowable limits, as well as to the proper expenses. From there, the actuals are checked on chain, and the forecasts are checked to the previous monthly budget statement in order to make sure that there's no changing of numbers. Otherwise, the forecast doesn't really carry weight anymore. There's also a MKR overview check to make sure that that vesting schedule is in line, and transfers are the final part of the auditing process. What happens at the end of this auditing process is that the accountant does the initial review, passes it over to the auditor. If everything looks good, then the report will be published to the GitHub. And if it doesn't look good, there's another process that we're still exploring and hope to summarize and then formalize in the near future, since there's more core units coming on. So going back to that auditing process, here's a full visual of the new process that we're working on. The core unit first submits the monthly budget transparency report to the GitHub, and from there, the accountants begin the review. So now we're in the second column from the left. Once the accountants complete their review, as described, the auditors validate their findings, and then there's 2 swim lanes. If everything looks good, the auditor just outright approves it, publishes it to the transparency GitHub, and approves payment, moving the funds from the auditor wallet to the operational wallet. If there are discrepancies, then there's 3 levels of discrepancies that each have their own unique course of action. If they're minor discrepancies that could be easily explained, the auditor will have a private conversation with the core unit facilitator and work on improving the quality of their documents. If the discrepancy is a little bit larger than what we would consider minor, or if there's consistent minor discrepancies, there would be a more stern conversation with potentially an action plan that would be put into place, again, more so in private, to support the core unit, maturing into a well-run independent team. But if there's major discrepancies or very long consistent issues, the community should be engaged. And this would look like a forum post outside of just the traditional audit document that would have other implications through signal polls or potentially on-chain to address the issue. Now, what value is created from all this work? The work is good, but if it's not supporting a more robust and disciplined DAO, then why are we doing it? We see that this process introduces higher levels of quality controls as well as transparency. The wallet setup and a consistent and complete audit document enable the transparency of flow of funds from the protocol to the core unit and the use of funds once in control of the core unit all the way through expenses. This progresses the DAO budgeting framework or processes from the summarized consensus and the standardized process phase and starts to introduce us to the formalized process. Now, what should we consider when building a formalized process? We believe that automation or DAO-tomation is the pivotal goal of this roadmap. We can start to see some of the value of this in play on the MIT portal today. The team that manages the MIP portal is able to extract data from the MIPs. MIPs get posted to the forum, they then get moved to a GitHub, and once they're in the GitHub format, they're able to be machine read to extract things like core unit facilitators, wallet setups, and more. We're hoping to introduce workforce statistics and other more consistent budget categories through the use of monthly budget statements. And the benefits of this work would be to reduce the manual work for core units like GovAlpha, as well as build informational dashboards that the community can use similar to MakerBurn. And ultimately, this also improves the audit process by putting automated checks in place and further reducing the workloads of the current teams doing it, and as well as potentially future core units that would be assigned to manage the accounting and audit functions. This is a quick example of what automated DAO-wide reporting could look like. This is a spreadsheet that AES has put together to start to drill down into core units that are reporting, but it is a very manual process, and it's not something that goes terribly quick. The other thing is that this is looking into the past. It's not real-time information, which we do have the opportunity to do here due to the environment of our core units and expenses being on chain. And ideally, by formalizing the process, we can invite and oversee or get a better perspective of as many core units as possible by formalizing this process. So where do we go from here, and what are the next steps? We will continue to upgrade the core unit budget spreadsheet to introduce automatically generating the monthly budget statements, reducing the overhead and the work required for a core unit to take advantage of this process. This endeavor also supports the addition of a finance reporting core unit because it's a joint effort for developing a DAO-wide reporting tool, creating a system that they can leverage to create these tools. And it also introduces the systematic auditing of core units, going back to the concepts of quality control and transparency. We're hoping more core units, we're helping more core units adopt the budget spreadsheet today, as well as building out some additional automation opportunities. And Wouter, I'm not sure if you have anything to add on Maker Database. You could probably speak to it a lot better than I could. But that's what we consider as the art of core unit budgeting and the picture we're trying to paint for Maker in 2022.
Yes, thank you, Richard. That was a lot of information to digest. The MakerDB, it's yeah, as with everything, it's baby steps, right? So the first thing we're working on is to make sure that these monthly budget statements that we saw, which are currently they're in Markdown, they're on GitHub. Today, they still need to be created manually, so kind of copy pasting values from the spreadsheet, the operational spreadsheet. And that's the first one that we'll tackle, is that you can automatically generate that report. And that will already like save a lot of time. In order to generate the report, it will also mean that we'll have the data in a database that can also be queried and summarized in different ways. Once you can generate the monthly budget statement report, then obviously you can use the same data to generate other kinds of reports that you would like. So if we have the numbers of the different core units in one database, we can start adding up categories, etc. So that's those are the next steps, but we hope to push it much further in the course of the coming quarters. So yeah, with that in place, let's have a look if there are any questions or comments in the chat. I see a lot of excitement about this, so that's great. There was a question how DSS Vest exactly works, and Peyton has given a good explanation. But the gist of it is that as a shortcut, we're saying DSS Vest is streaming, but DSS Vest is really not streaming. What DSS Vest is, it is a contract that has the vesting schedule. So basically the start point and the end point configured in it, and the amount. And whoever is the beneficiary, they can pull funds from DSS Vest, and it will basically look at the timeline. Where are we? How much are you allowed to pull at this point, which linearly adds up. And yeah, if you haven't pulled all the funds, then it will allow you to pull the additional funds that you haven't pulled before. So that's really how it works. As every smart contract, DSS Vest is passive, so it can't really stream or send anything without an external transaction that interacts with it. So there's maybe Retro, if you go back to the difference between the forecast and the budget cap, so the spreadsheet, thought it would be good to maybe add a little example here of how these things can be different. So one of the things we want to do is to make sure that the budget MIPs, they have a longer lifetime, so you don't have to resubmit your MIP every 3 months because you hired a new team member or something small changed. So rather the budget cap would take that into account. So you could have, for example, a team that is only 5 people today, but they're planning on hiring 3 more throughout the coming year. The budget cap would be for 8 people. But of course, that doesn't mean that these people will be hired from day one. And that's where the forecast can differ significantly from the budget cap. So the forecast would say, for example, next month will still be 5 people. The month after that will still be 5 people. The month after that, number 6 will join us. So our forecast goes up. And it is that forecast that is used as to request as a top-up to request the necessary operational funds from the auditors. So if you have a team that is scaling up, their budget cap might be quite high, but in the beginning, their forecast will be a lot lower, and it is the forecast that they receive from the auditors. So it's it's a much more controlled transferring of the funds that they had in the MIP. And then as Retro mentioned, the next level of precision basically is the estimate, and the estimate really only takes into account the invoices or the payment requests that have already been received. So even if you forecast that you will pay someone next month, they might be late with their invoice. So the estimate then will actually be zero, because we never actually received the invoice from that person. And the other variation here is the exchange rate. There are things that are very difficult to predict exactly in advance. So for example, if you're paying people in fiat, in euro, then what exactly will be the exchange rate with DAI? It's difficult to say until the point where you actually make the transfer. So that's also something that is calculated into the estimate. And then ultimately, after the fact, that's the only point where you really know how much DAI you spent. That is the actual. There might still be a small difference with that estimate, because there might be a slightly different exchange rate, for example. So it's really useful to look at like these four levels as going from high level, long-term rough estimates to very specific numbers of what actually got spent. So these four levels are the budget cap, the forecast, the estimate, and then ultimately the actuals. Then Frank is asking, assuming every core unit adopts this tool, will each core unit have its own accountant and auditor? I don't think so. Yes, they each will have an accountant and auditor, but the way we expect this to evolve is that these roles basically get professionalized, in the sense that there might be an accountant core unit, which basically does this work like systematically for every core unit, right? Because it's a lot of just grind work, like reading through the statements, cross-checking the numbers, etc. And if a particular core unit specializes in that, they will just be much more efficient in doing that. And then they will also have like a systematic approach that will lend itself optimally for further optimization, because a lot of these audit checks, that's the power of having everything on chain and available maybe in databases, is that you can start checking these things automatically. If the system knows the forecast, then it can figure out whether your on-chain transactions fall within the forecast or you're going over it. And then the next thing you could imagine is that there is an automated alert that is triggered if a particular core unit is, for example, spending 3 times the forecast that they submitted. So by professionalizing it, we will get to a more systematic approach that can then later be automated and will scale even further. The only core unit will need, there shouldn't be a loop, right? So SES today is taking up the role of accountant and auditor of the core units we've advised. But of course, we don't want to be our own auditor, and we're still looking to work with other community members to be the SES auditor. So that's that's the only point where you need a second party really to take up that role. Can we monetize this? Yeah, it's a fair question, because we're building all these tools and we're working out all these processes, and not just not just around budgeting and auditing, but also, for example, the risk infrastructure and dashboards, etc., that we're building. These are really useful tools in their own right that might be very useful for other DAOs. And yeah, this is kind of a can of worms that I haven't opened yet, because it's clear that at one point it will be more efficient to build these tools to not just cater for MakerDAO's needs, but also other DAOs. But then the question is, the core unit that develops these, are they like a startup that are owned by MakerDAO? How do we make sure that they still prioritize the interests of the MakerDAO protocol? The profits that they get from that product, where do those go to? So that there are a lot of interesting questions there to consider. But I think it's obvious that when we're building these tools, at one point it will become just more efficient to support more DAOs, not just MakerDAO, and that will mean that there will be even more funds available to really build the best tools available. Yes, QuickBooks for DAOs. That's what this will probably end up with. So, but luckily, developing software goes really slowly. So we still have a little bit of time to figure that out. All right, so I'm checking if there are any other questions or comments. Peyton, you said you had another question about pools and returns. Yeah, go ahead. Let's. If I can find you in the list, I'll unmute you. There we go.
Thank you. So my question is if you've thought about formalizing like when polls and returns take place as a part of this framework. I think it's like not super relevant for a lot of core units, but for ones like GovAlpha or future core units with a neutrality mandate, like when you take and return your funds could be somewhat political based on like the burning situation. So that's why I'm asking.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point. I actually hadn't connected it to burning MKR. Yeah, you're right. So the way that the process currently describes it is that, so we recommend, and this has a different reason. It's for reasons of like job security, right? And because the DAO cannot really make legally binding agreements. So we recommend that people are paid in twice a month so half monthly billing cycles. The budget statement, however, is only produced at the end of every month. And to be more precise, so the thing is that for the budget statement, this one, it includes the actual. So you need to wait for the payments of the last cycle to be finished before you can finalize your budget statement. So that's why in the budget MIPS that we've published today, it says that the core units are supposed to publish their budget statement before the 5th of the month, right? So before the 5th of December, you should try and publish your November budget statement. Now, then it needs to be reviewed by the accountant and the auditor. And then, of course, it could be that there are a couple of points of clarification, little back and forth. So that might take a little bit of time. And then, yeah, let's say another 5 days or something, should be able to confirm the budget statement and do the transfer from the auditor wallet to the operational wallet. So that's, let's say, the 10th of every month. And that's the point where you would look at the balance. So around the 10th of every month, you pull whatever is available from DSS Vest into the auditor wallet. You send what is needed for the 3-month forecast top up to the operational wallet. And then you look at whatever is left in the auditor wallet, and whatever is above the level of 2 months worth of budget cap, you send back to the protocol. So yeah, to answer your question, there is not a super strict rule, like when exactly budgets should be pulled or sent back. But the way that it's included in the process today, you would expect it to happen between, let's say, the 5th and the 15th of every month. What you could do is like you could set like a slightly later date so that you can definitely make it, and say, for example, the 15th of every month we go through this cycle. But I honestly think that it's probably better to just do this systematically for all the core units, and as the core unit number is growing, just try and like do this as soon as possible, as early as possible in the month. And you know, if as soon as you see that there's more funds available than what you need for the buffer, just send it back. And I think because there will be more and more core units, this, you know, these changes will be they will be more and more gradual. The balance changes. What you probably shouldn't do is wait 3 months before you pull your funds, right? Because then it really becomes like a large amount, and people start to get frustrated because maybe the burn was just going to start and then you basically extended it. Yeah, so timely pull and returns on a monthly cadence. That's basically what it boils down to. One more question from Frank. Best practices that core units can use to safely access their multi-sig front ends. Yeah, okay. Yes, and so this is where we want to collaborate with the fairly new core units. That the one that has already been approved, of course, is Immunify Security core unit. And then we have the TechOps core unit who just published their RFC. And these are the core units that should help the ecosystem players to get back better operational security. And we definitely want to work with them to figure out what those best practices are. There are a few rules of thumb that we're applying. So for example, we definitely, if there is a situation where there is like a risk of funds being lost because it's, for example, a 3 out of 3 multi-sig, and then if someone loses, like their hardware wallet gets broken or something, and they can't recover, then those funds would be stuck. So that's one element, is that we're more systematically adding the protocol as a backup option to make sure that funds cannot get stuck. The operations that we are teaching, that just use the standard Gnosis Save UI. But there are, it might be worth considering having a dedicated setup for MakerDAO core units, and basically recommend that core units always use that one, so that if the official Gnosis multi-sig interface gets compromised, and that one will be a bigger target, because of course everyone is using the same interface. So if you as a hacker can sneak in a front-end hack, then that would be really it would affect a lot of people using that same interface, and the funds that you could steal could be huge. So yeah, I think there is still a lot more work to be done there. Right now, the best practices that we recommend, they're pretty basic. Use the official user interface. Make sure that you use a hardware wallet, not your MetaMask wallet or whatever, and make sure that your setup of your multi-sigs is such that there is some redundancy, so that the funds can't get stuck. Yeah. All right, so I hope that answered the question. More to come there with our ongoing collaboration with Immunify Security core unit and TechOps. And I think that was probably it for this week. So thank you, Retro, for the very thorough presentation. Thanks everyone for joining, and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.